When hearing the words air rifle, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Do you think of the little plastic toy that pushes out a foam dart? Or the official Red Ryder carbine action 200 shot range model air rifle with a compass in the stock and a little thing that tells time? As you may have guessed it, we'll be talking about air rifles today. Now, at face value, I may not seem like the best choice to talk about this type of topic, considering the fact that I've never used a firearm, but I am more than slightly obsessed on the topic, and I've done my fair share of research. In my freshman year of high school, I presented a 20-minute speech on how firearms have changed in warfare from the American Revolution until today. So I feel a little bit qualified to inform you on this subject. So, when I first looked into this, I myself did not exactly know all too much about air rifles or about the topic in general. But now, after having done the research, I feel confident that we can all learn a little bit more and do away with the hazy fog that surrounds the obscure air rifle. So, in order to look at the air rifle, we must first see the explicit differences between the traditional firearm and the air rifle. After that, we will be able to see how the air rifle is both superior and inferior to a firearm. So first, let us take a look at the inherent differences between the air gun and the firearm, not necessarily pros and cons. So, three major differences between the air gun and the traditional rifle are the commonality of calibers, the method of propulsion, and the fact that the air gun is technically not a gun according to federal law. So, for one, commonality of calibers. For a firearm, be it your handgun or a rifle, has so many different calibers on the market that you can pick it up in. It could be the smaller 22, it could be the larger 45, so on and so forth. I mean, when I was researching, I found there's a list of the top 10 handgun rounds online. In contrast, there are really only two common airgun calibers, and there's roughly 5 to 7 calibers overall. The second difference are the differences in propulsion. This one's a little bit more obvious. The traditional firearm uses a chemical reaction with the burning gunpowder to use the gases to push the bullet down the chamber. With an air gun, it's more mechanical, using either compressed air or compressed gas to push a pellet down the chamber. And the third difference is that according to the Gun Control Act of 1968, an air gun is technically not a gun unless it has the receiver, is built from the receiver of a firearm. So an air rifle is not held to the same standards or the same regulations as a firearm is. So, as I just said, the three of the largest differences between air guns and firearms are the availability of calibers, the method used to shoot the round, and the fact that two weapons are held to vastly different standards when subjected to federal law. Now that we've had a chance to see the main differences between the air gun and the firearm, we can take a look at how the air gun can be superior to the firearm. So historically, the air gun when it was placed against the musket, it outclassed it on several fronts. For example, the air gun, which you can still see it today, was much quieter than the report of the crack of gunpowder and the hot gases expanding from a firearm. And secondly, giving this advantage over the musket, it's not too much of a point today, but back then, being able to load, shoot, and fire in the rain was something that the musket just could not do. And the fact that even though an air gun has a smaller caliber, an academic study found that it has the same power it has the same power. It's relative to, like, say, a 45 caliber handgun at a considerable range. So some of the differences between the airgun and the firearm that set it apart, make it slightly more superior than the firearm, is the fact that it has a much quieter muzzle report. It can be fired while wet, unlike the loose gunpowder firearms of the past, and the fact that a smaller caliber can still do considerable damage, as opposed to the feeling that it has to be a larger caliber to do a lot of damage. However, not everything can be superior. There's always something negative or inferior between the firearm and the airgun. For example, there are several things that the airgun has to it that makes it inferior to the firearm. For example, the airgun suffers accuracy issues when it fires a pellet at supersonic speeds. Because of the shape of the pellet, it has difficulty overcoming the sound barrier. And when it drops back under the sound barrier, the turbulence can knock it off course. And additionally, if you're using a spring piston style propulsion system, the movement when it fires can be jarring to the firearms or to the airgun. So if you have an optic on top that's not designed for that type of usage, it could knock it out of alignment or damage it. And unlike a firearm, airguns have to be, in a sense, loaded twice. You have to make sure that the pellets are loaded, just like the firearm. You have to make sure you have rounds, but you also have to make sure that there's air in the system, either by pumping it up or inserting a CO2 cartridge or whatever you use. Whereas on the other hand, the firearm, you just have the cartridge. It's all self-contained. You have the gunpowder, you have the primer, you have the bullet, you have the casing. It's all there. So on the other hand, the airgun does suffer from three distinctive features that render it inferior to the traditional firearm. So, in conclusion, we have seen several different aspects between airguns and traditional firearms. As expected, airguns and firearms have many things that set them apart. Some are simply just differences, like the method of propulsion, chemical, gunpowder, mechanical, air, or gas. Some make the airgun a better choice, such as being much quieter and a lot easier on the ears when you fire. Whereas others still make the firearm a better choice because the most firearm rounds are much more stable in the air rather than the oddly shaped airgun pellet. So now hopefully the words airgun conjure up more than just the thoughts of a toy BB or dart gun. Perhaps now one can see how the airgun is set apart from the firearm, and how the airgun is deserving of its own praise.